Lock your eyes on the timestamp in the top corner. 2:15 a.m., November 14th, 2018. The silent, carpeted hallway of the Hotel Royal in New Orleans. The security camera captures a burst of color against the beige walls. That is Elena Vance, 25 years old, a vision in a short crimson dress, her long blonde hair falling loose down her back. But she isn't alone. Wrapped around her is Marcus Jackson, 30. He is a wall of muscle, his gray short-sleeved shirt straining against his chest, dark tattoos mapping the story of a violent life across his arms. They are stumbling, locked in a passionate, consuming embrace. He kisses her deeply, and she holds on to him as if he is the only solid thing in the world. They reach room 304. The door swings open, swallowing them into the darkness, and clicks shut. It looks like the beginning of a passionate night. But when the sun rises over the French Quarter, that door will be locked from the inside, and Elena Vance will never walk out of room 304 again. Pay attention to the young woman standing in front of the full-length mirror in room 304 of the Hotel Royal in New Orleans. It is the evening of November 14th, 2018. This is Elena Vance, known to her family as Ellie. At 25 years old, she possesses the kind of fresh-faced, wholesome beauty that seems out of place in the humid, vice-filled air of the French Quarter. Her long blonde hair is brushed to a shine, cascading down her back, and her blue eyes are wide, with a mixture of exhilaration and terror. Elena is a long way from home. She hails from a small, tight-knit community in the Midwest, a place defined by Sunday services, potluck dinners, and expectations that are carved in stone. For her entire life, Elena has been the good girl. She followed the rules, she attended the youth groups, and she smiled when she was told to smile. But tonight, the reflection staring back at her is a stranger. She is wearing a dress she bought in secret, a crimson-red slip dress that ends high above her knees, hugging curves she has spent a lifetime hiding under modest cardigans. She isn't just in New Orleans for a vacation. She is on the run. Back home, a wedding is being planned. It is a union arranged by the gentle but suffocating pressure of her parents and her church elders, a marriage to a man she does not love. A future that feels more like a prison sentence than a life. This solo trip is her first act of true rebellion, a desperate gasp for air before the walls close in. She wants to feel something real. She wants to be reckless. She wants to be someone else, even if just for a few days. She checks her phone, sees 3 missed calls from her mother, and deliberately turns the device over, face down, on the nightstand. She grabs her clutch and heads for the door, heart pounding in her chest. Less than 3 blocks away, the neon lights of Bourbon Street reflect off the wet pavement, casting long, distorted shadows. Moving through the crowd like a shark through water is Marcus Jackson, a man who demands space simply by existing. At 30 years old, Marcus is a physical, imposing figure, his dark skin stretching over thick, corded muscle. He is wearing a tight, gray, short-sleeved shirt that does nothing to hide the tapestry of ink covering his arms. Tattoos that tell the story of a hard life, of stint in the state penitentiary, of violence given and received. People on the street call him King, a nickname born from fear rather than respect. But tonight, the king has been dethroned. Just 30 minutes earlier, Marcus was forcibly removed from his position as head of security at a popular nightclub. It wasn't the first time his temper had cost him a paycheck. He had beaten a patron too badly for a minor slight, crossing the line from enforcement to brutality. The club owner had screamed at him to get out, calling him a liability. Now Marcus walks with a dangerous energy. His jaw clenched tight. He is humiliated. And for a man like Marcus Jackson, humiliation is a fuel that burns hot and fast. He feels the emptiness inside him, a void that he usually fills with intimidation and control. He has no job, limited cash, and a rage that is looking for a target. He isn't ready to go back to his cramped, dingy apartment on the outskirts of the city. He wants a drink. He wants to be in a place where people look at him with a mix of desire and fear. As Elena steps out of the elevator and into the lobby of the Hotel Royal, she feels a thrill of electricity. The hotel bar is dimly lit, smelling of expensive bourbon and old wood. It is sophisticated, a world away from the church socials of her youth. She orders a white wine, her fingers trembling slightly as she holds the stem of the glass. She is visibly out of her element, scanning the room with eyes that are too trusting, too eager to be seen. Simultaneously, the revolving doors at the front of the hotel spin, pushing the humid night air into the air-conditioned lobby. Marcus Jackson steps inside. He isn't staying here. He couldn't afford a room in a place like this, but the hotel bar doesn't check room keys. He strides past the concierge, his heavy boots silent on the plush carpet. He is looking for a distraction. He is looking for someone who doesn't know he's a failure. Someone who sees only the muscle and the swagger. Two distinct timelines are about to collapse into one. The runaway good girl seeking rebellion and the angry ex-convict seeking dominance. They are currently separated by only 20 feet of mahogany bar counter and the chatter of tourists. Elena turns on her stool, the red dress riding up her thigh, just as Marcus scans the room. The trap is set, though neither of them knows it yet. The connection at the Hotel Royal bar was instantaneous and volatile, like a match struck in a room full of gasoline. Marcus Jackson didn't ask for permission to sit next to Elena. He simply claimed the space, his large frame eclipsing the ambient light, casting a shadow over her white wine. To Elena, blurred by the alcohol and the heady rush of rebellion, Marcus didn't look like danger. He looked like salvation from a lifetime of boredom. He ordered whiskey, neat, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. When he turned to look at her, his eyes were heavy-lidded and predatory, assessing the cost of her dress and the naivety in her smile. He saw the good girl persona she was trying so desperately to shed, and he knew exactly which buttons to push. He leaned in close, invading her personal space, his tattooed forearm brushing against her bare shoulder. "You look like you're running from something, Red," he murmured, the nickname falling easily from his lips. Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into the touch, laughing a little too loudly at a joke that wasn't particularly funny, her inhibitions dissolving with every sip of her drink. 1,200 miles away, in a quiet suburb of Ohio, the silence was deafening. The digital clock on Martha Vance's nightstand read 2:05 a.m., but she hadn't slept a wink. A mother's intuition is a primal, inexplicable force, and tonight it was screaming at her. Martha sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her smartphone until her knuckles turned white. She dialed Elena's number for the 15th time that hour. The ringing tone echoed in the empty room, monotonous and mocking, before clicking over to the voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Ellie. Leave a message." The cheerful pre-recorded voice of her daughter felt like a ghost. "Ellie, it's Mom," Martha whispered, her voice cracking with suppressed panic. I have a bad feeling. Please, just call me back so I know you're safe. I love you." She hung up, staring at the dark screen, unaware that her prayers were traveling into a void, competing with the thumping bass of a New Orleans night. Back at the Hotel Royal, the atmosphere had shifted from flirtation to raw, consuming hunger. It was 2:10 a.m. when Marcus placed a heavy hand on the small of Elena's back and whispered something in her ear that made her flush a deep crimson. She nodded, finishing her drink in one long swallow. They stood up together, a striking study in contrasts. Her delicate frame in the red dress against his hulking, gray-clad mass. They stumbled slightly as they moved toward the elevators, not just from the alcohol, but from the gravity pulling them together. The elevator ride was a blur of hands and lips, a prelude to the tragedy waiting on the third floor. The hallway security camera, grainy and silent, captured the final act of their public performance at exactly 2:15 a.m. The footage shows the elevator doors sliding open. Elena steps out first, her blonde hair wild and loose, the red dress riding high on her thighs. She spins around, wrapping her arms around Marcus's neck, pulling him down to her level. Marcus, his biceps straining against the fabric of his gray short-sleeved shirt, wraps his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. The tattoos on his exposed skin look like dark bruises in the low light. They kiss with a ferocity that looks less like romance and more like a collision, oblivious to the camera watching from the ceiling. They are a tangle of limbs and desire, moving awkwardly but with singular purpose down the corridor. They reach room 304. Marcus swipes the key card. The small green light flashes, a silent signal of permission. He pushes the door open, guiding Elena backward into the room. For a split second, the camera catches a glimpse of the unmade bed inside, before the heavy wooden door swings shut, cutting off the view. The lock engages with a final metallic click. The hallway is empty again, silent and still. The heavy click of the deadbolt sliding into place acted like a severance from reality, cutting off the safety of the corridor and sealing room 304 into a private, soundproof world. Inside, the air conditioning hummed a low, monotonous drone that would soon bear witness to a nightmare. For the first 20 minutes, the energy in the room mirrored the hallway, frantic, clumsy, and driven by the residual adrenaline of their public display. But as the minutes ticked by and the alcohol began to metabolize, the haze clouding Elena's judgment started to thin. The thrill of rebellion that had carried her from Ohio to this hotel room evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping realization of her vulnerability. Marcus was no longer the exciting stranger she had met at the bar. In the confines of the small room, his presence became suffocating. His touch, once welcomed as passionate, grew aggressive and demanding. He wasn't holding her. He was handling her, his grip on her arms leaving white pressure marks that faded too slowly. When Elena laughed nervously and tried to pull away, murmuring that things were moving too fast, the atmosphere in the room shattered. She didn't know that her hesitation was the spark falling into the powder keg of Marcus Jackson's psyche. To Elena, she was simply setting a boundary. To Marcus, her withdrawal was an insult. It triggered the deep-seated insecurity that had plagued him all night, the humiliation of being fired, the feeling of being looked down upon by the world, the rage of a man who felt owed something he could never quite grasp. He saw the shift in her eyes, the way the admiration was replaced by fear, and it enraged him. He didn't see a woman saying, "Stop." He saw a spoiled girl realizing she was too good for him. The switch inside him, the one that had sent him to prison years before, flipped with a terrifying finality. "You think you're better than me?" he growled, his voice losing its smooth, baritone charm and becoming a jagged edge. Elena backed up until her legs hit the edge of the mattress, her hands raised in a futile gesture of placation. The romance was dead, replaced instantly by a predator-prey dynamic. The room, which had felt like a sanctuary of freedom an hour ago, was now a cage. The struggle that ensued was not a fight between equals, but a frantic, terrifying attempt by Elena to survive a storm she hadn't seen coming. Her pleas were swallowed by the heavy curtains and the thick walls, her voice choked off by the very hands she had kissed just moments before. 3 floors down, in the brightly lit, sterile environment of the lobby, the world continued to spin with indifferent normalcy. It was 3:30 a.m. The night auditor, a college dropout named Kevin, sat behind the marble counter, bathed in the blue glow of his laptop screen. The lobby was empty, the revolving doors still for the first time in hours. Kevin was bored, his mind drifting between the action movie streaming on his screen and the clock on the wall, counting down the hours until his shift ended. Suddenly, a dull, heavy thud reverberated through the ceiling above him. It was a sound distinct enough to make him pause the movie, a vibration that felt like dead weight hitting a floorboard. He pulled one earbud out, tilting his head toward the ceiling, listening. Silence followed. He frowned, glancing at the bank of security monitors, but they only showed empty hallways and elevators. For a brief, critical moment, Kevin debated picking up the phone to call security, or checking the third floor himself. But this was New Orleans. This was the French Quarter during the height of the season. Guests were always drunk, stumbling, falling over furniture, or passing out. Just last week, a couple had knocked over a lamp during an argument. If he went up there every time he heard a noise, he'd never get to sit down. Just drunks, he muttered to himself, rationalizing away the sound of a life ending. He convinced himself it was nothing more than clumsy tourists or a suitcase falling off a luggage rack. With a shrug that would haunt him for the rest of his life, Kevin put his earbud back in, pressed play on his movie, and let the noise of fictional explosions drown out the reality of the tragedy that had just concluded directly above his head. Up in room 304, the struggle had ceased, leaving behind a silence far heavier than the noise that preceded it. While the Hotel Royal slumbered in the pre-dawn darkness, a shadow detached itself from the facade of the building, moving with the desperate agility of a man hunting for his freedom. It was 4 a.m., exactly 30 minutes after the struggle in room 304 had ceased. Inside the room, the deadbolt was still engaged, and the privacy latch was securely thrown, creating the illusion of a fortress breached by a ghost. Marcus Jackson stood on the narrow balcony, the humid New Orleans air sticking to his skin, which was now slick with a cold, nervous sweat. He wasn't leaving through the door. That would mean passing the cameras again. Instead, he swung his heavy legs over the wrought iron railing, his muscles straining as he reached for the adjacent fire escape ladder. It was a perilous maneuver, suspended 3 stories above the cobblestones. But fear is a potent motivator. With a metallic groan that was fortunately swallowed by the wind, the ladder took his weight. He descended into the alleyway, his boots hitting the damp pavement with a soft thud, effectively vanishing from the hotel's perimeter without tripping a single sensor. Marcus began the long walk back to his neighborhood, sticking to the shadows of the unlit side streets where the tourists didn't wander. He was shirtless now, the gray short-sleeved shirt bundled tightly in his fist. It was a piece of evidence that screamed his guilt, stained with his sweat and the microscopic traces of Elena's DNA. He found what he was looking for near an industrial loading dock, a rusted burn barrel used by the homeless to keep warm. The embers were dying, but Marcus stoked them to life with trash before throwing the gray shirt onto the pile. He watched with a detached, cold fascination as the fabric caught fire, the flames licking away the blood and the gray cotton, curling the evidence into black ash that floated up into the night sky. By the time he reached his dilapidated apartment complex, the sun was threatening to rise. Inside his bathroom, staring into a cracked mirror, Marcus began the final stage of his transformation. He lathered his face and took a razor to his beard, scraping away the facial hair that had defined his appearance for years. As the dark stubble fell into the sink, King disappeared, replaced by a clean-shaven stranger who could claim he had been home all night. He rehearsed the lie in the mirror, his eyes devoid of remorse, already building the fortress of denial that he would present to the world. 5 hours later, the morning sun bathed the French Quarter in a deceptive golden light. It was 9 a.m. inside the Hotel Royal. The hallway on the 3rd floor smelled of coffee and pastries as the room service attendant, a cheerful woman named Maria, pushed her cart toward room 304. She checked her list. A breakfast order had been placed the night before, pre-scheduled for this time. She knocked briskly. "Room service," she called out, her voice bright. Silence. She waited, then knocked again. Harder this time. "Good morning. Breakfast is here." Still nothing. Frowning, she tried the handle, but it was locked tight. Assuming the guest was in a deep sleep, she radioed the front desk. Minutes later, the hotel manager, Mr. Henderson, arrived with the master keycard, annoyed at the delay. He swiped the card and the electronic lock beeped green. He pushed the door, but it stopped abruptly after 2 inches. The metal swing bar lock was engaged from the inside. "Miss Vance?" Henderson called through the crack, his annoyance shifting to concern. The privacy latch meant someone was definitely inside. Yet there was no sound. No rustling sheets, no running water, only a heavy, unnatural stillness. Panic began to prick at the back of his neck. Using a specialized tool kept for emergencies, he disengaged the swing bar and pushed the door open. The room was freezing. The air conditioning had been blasting at full power for hours. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in gloom, but the light from the hallway cut a swath across the king-size bed. There, lying diagonally across the pristine white sheets, was Elena. The vibrant red dress, now torn at the shoulder strap, looked like a wound against the pale bedding. Her eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the ceiling, and the bruising on her neck was already darkening. She was stone cold. The scream that rose in Maria's throat shattered the morning calm, marking the end of the mystery and the beginning of the hunt. The investigation into the murder in room 304 moved with the terrifying speed of the digital age. By the morning of November 16th, the grainy security footage from the Hotel Royal hallway had been leaked to the press, broadcasting the final, intimate moments of Elena Vance to millions of screens across America. The media dubbed it the kiss of death, and the image of the blonde girl in the red dress embracing the hulking, shadowed figure became an instant, macabre icon. In the headquarters of the New Orleans Police Department, however, the focus was not on the tragedy of the image, but on the forensic details hidden within the pixels. Detective Benoit and his team had isolated the frames where the suspect's arm was most visible under the halogen hallway lights. Using digital enhancement software, they cut through the graininess to reveal the distinct, jagged ink that mapped the killer's skin. It wasn't just random art, it was a biography of crime, written in needle and ink. A distinct spider web on the elbow and a fragmented crown on the forearm were cross-referenced with the Louisiana Department of Corrections database. The computer took less than an hour to spit out a match. The unknown male had a name: Marcus King Jackson, a violent offender with a history of assault and battery, released on parole just 18 months prior. The search warrant was signed immediately, and a frantic, city-wide manhunt began. While his face was being plastered onto wanted posters and digital billboards along the interstate, Marcus Jackson was rotting in the stifling heat of a cramped back bedroom in the lower 9th Ward. He had sought refuge in the home of a distant cousin, an elderly woman who asked few questions and watched little television. But the isolation was doing nothing to calm the storm raging inside his head. Paranoia had set in like a fever. Every siren that wailed in the distance, and in New Orleans, sirens are the city's soundtrack, made him flinch, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He spent his hours pacing the small room, peering through the slats of the blinds, convinced that every passing car was an undercover unit. The clean-shaven face in the mirror still felt alien to him, a mask that was failing to hide the monster underneath. However, in the twisted labyrinth of Marcus's mind, there was no room for remorse. As he sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, watching the mute television flicker with news of the murder, he didn't feel guilt for the life he had extinguished. Instead, a cancerous resentment began to bloom. He reconstructed the narrative of that night to fit his own fragile ego. In his version of the story, Elena wasn't a victim. She was a villain. She was the rich, entitled girl who had dangled freedom and affection in front of him, only to snatch it away when he wasn't good enough. He told himself that she had humiliated him, that she had led him into that room and then tried to discard him like trash. She did this, he muttered to the empty room, his logic spiraling into the classic defense of the abuser. She played with fire. She shouldn't have looked at me like that if she didn't want it. He convinced himself that her fear in those final moments was actually deceit, a betrayal of the connection they had shared in the hallway. By blaming the dead girl, Marcus built a psychological fortress to protect himself from the truth of his own brutality. He wasn't a murderer in his own eyes. He was the aggrieved party. The man pushed too far by a world that constantly disrespected him. This delusion was his armor. But the armor cracked on the evening of the third day. Breaking his own rule, he turned up the volume on the small television set. The breaking news banner flashed red, and suddenly his own mugshot, the one with the beard and the cold, dead eyes, filled the screen. "Armed and dangerous," the anchor announced. "Police have identified the suspect as 30-year-old Marcus Jackson." The cousin in the next room shifted, and the floorboards creaked. Marcus froze. The anonymity was gone. The narrative he had built in his head wouldn't save him now. The city was closing in, and the king was cornered, armed with nothing but his delusions and a fear that was quickly turning into desperation. The end of Marcus Jackson's run came not with a bang, but with the hiss of hydraulic brakes at the Greyhound bus station on Loyola Avenue. It was 3 days after the murder, a humid Thursday afternoon. Marcus stood in line for a one-way ticket to Houston, his hat pulled low, clutching a duffel bag that contained his entire life. He looked ordinary, just another traveler weary from the road, but his eyes darted nervously, scanning the terminals. He didn't see the plainclothes officers converging from the periphery until a heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. "Marcus Jackson?" The question was a formality. Before he could even flinch, he was slammed against the ticket counter, the cold steel of handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. He didn't fight. The rage that had fueled him in room 304 had burned out, leaving only a hollow, sullen resignation. As they marched him past the stunned onlookers, the king looked small, defeated, and utterly pathetic. Inside the stark, windowless interrogation room at the NOPD headquarters, Marcus dropped the facade of the misunderstood victim, but he refused to accept full responsibility. Slumping in the metal chair, he looked at Detective Benoit with dead, shark-like eyes. "We were just having fun," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We were drinking. Things got rough. It was an accident, man. She slipped." He tried to paint a picture of a consensual encounter gone wrong, a tragic mistake fueled by whiskey and bad luck. He claimed he panicked, that he never meant to hurt her. But the science of death does not lie, and the forensic report lay on the table between them like a damning indictment. The medical examiner had found skin cells under Elena's fingernails, Marcus's skin. There were deep contusions on her forearms and defensive wounds on her palms. These were not the marks of passion or an accident. They were the desperate, clawing attempts of a woman fighting for her life against a superior force. The evidence painted a brutal picture of Elena's final minutes. She had not slipped away quietly. She had battled with every ounce of strength she possessed. Confronted with the DNA match and the autopsy photos, Marcus's defense crumbled into a sullen silence. The trial was swift. The jury needed less than 4 hours to see through the lies. The judge, visibly disgusted by Marcus's lack of remorse, handed down the maximum sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Marcus was led away in shackles, destined to die in a concrete box. His name destined to be forgotten. While the legal gears turned, a quieter, more devastating scene unfolded in the hallway of the Hotel Royal. Martha Vance and her husband Robert had flown down from Ohio to claim their daughter's body. The city of New Orleans, with its jazz and vibrant colors, felt to them like a graveyard. They stood outside room 304, staring at the polished wood of the door. The police tape had been removed, and the hotel was trying to return to business as usual. But for the Vances, time had stopped. Martha reached out, her trembling fingers brushing the brass number plate, trying to sense the last vibrations of her daughter's spirit. They didn't go inside. They couldn't bear to see the bed where their little girl had taken her last breath. Instead, they stood in the corridor where the security camera still blinked its red eye from the ceiling. That grainy footage, The video of Elena in her red dress, throwing her arms around Marcus, kissing him with such reckless abandon, played on a loop in their minds. To the world, it was a sensational clip on the evening news. To her parents, it was a knife in the heart. It captured Elena at her most alive, her most hopeful, seeking love and adventure, completely unaware that she was embracing her own executioner. The tragedy wasn't just in her death, but in the terrifying thinness of the line that separated that moment of passion from the horror that followed. The ghost of room 304 wasn't a spirit haunting the hotel. It was the memory of a bright, beautiful life, extinguished because she trusted the wrong smile in a crowded bar. As the Vances walked away, leaving the empty hallway behind, the silence of the hotel felt heavy with the weight of unanswerable questions. The case was closed. The killer was caged. But the red dress and the final kiss would remain forever frozen in the digital memory of the camera, a haunting reminder of how quickly a dream can turn into a nightmare. The story of Elena Vance is a heartbreaking reminder that evil often wears a human face. It teaches us that the line between a moment of passion and a lifetime of regret is terrifyingly thin. Elena was not to blame for seeking freedom or love, but her story warns us that predators like Marcus Jackson are always watching, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. They look for the lonely, the intoxicated, and the lost. For everyone watching, please take this lesson to heart. Trust your instincts. If a situation feels wrong, it probably is. Never isolate yourself with a stranger in a private space, no matter how charming they seem or how safe you feel in the moment. There is safety in numbers, and there is no shame in walking away to protect your life. Please share this video with your friends and family. By spreading this story, you might just save a life or make someone think twice before walking into a dangerous situation. If you would like to see more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We need to keep these memories alive to learn from them. Let us send our prayers to the Vance family who still carry the heavy burden of this loss. If you believe that Elena is finally at peace and watching down from above, please type Amen in the comments below. May God watch over you and your loved ones, keeping you safe from the shadows. Stay safe and take care of each other.